Years of broadcasting around the world and to the great beyond.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome to the X Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 8 p.m. Eastern until midnight, live and around the world from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and distributed worldwide to broadcasters on every continent right here from our studios and on the X Zone Broadcast Network. Worldwide toll-free 800-610-7035. My email address is xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. And our main website for the radio show where you can listen to the show live Monday through Friday from 8 until midnight. And then the rest of the time, other great programming from the X Zone Broadcast Network, including the very best of the X Zone Radio Show at www.xzoneradiotv.com. My first guest tonight, X Zone Nation, is Dr. Don K. Preston. He is the president and founder of the Preterist? How do you say that, Don? Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. He is a prolific author, having published 19 titles and many DVDs and MP3s on biblical prophecy. He owns two popular websites, www.eschatology.org and BibleProphecy.com. Joining me now to discuss the one and only Jimmy Baker from the PTL Club and his latest claim to fame, being a prophet. Joining me now is Dr. Don K. Preston. Don, always welcome to the show, my friend. How are you?
I'm just doing absolutely fantastic, Rob. Hope all's well with you.
Everything is fine, my good friend, but I have to ask you, what in the name of God is Jim Baker up to?
Well, those of us who will remember Jim Baker and the scam that he ran several years ago on the PTL network, scamming people out of thousands of dollars and, of course, claiming that he was a teacher of God's Word and what have you. Mm-hmm. Well, he's at it again with a slightly different approach. Now he is having guest after guest after guest on, proclaiming that the end is just, well, it's here. And we really shouldn't be surprised, I suppose, Rob, because, we went through this thing called the Shemitah last September, in which the entire financial world of America was supposed to collapse. And then we had John Hagee's false predictions about the, let me see, how did he put it? Something big is about to happen. Something earth-shattering is about to happen. And it had to happen, in relationship to the four blood moons. And, of course, nothing happened. And so he just moved on to something else. Well, now, just recently, Rob, on the Jim Baker show, he had a guest by the name of John Shorey. Now, I must confess, I'm not real familiar with Mr. Shorey, but really doesn't matter. He follows in the same vein of John Hagee, Jonathan Cahn, and these other con men. And here's what's fascinating, all right? Here's what is absolutely fascinating. Mr. Shorey, and I listened to this myself, made the prediction that the Great Tribulation will be in March of this year. I mean, That's cutting the deadline really, really close. And here's the fascinating thing about this, to show you that Mr. Shorey and Jim Bakker and all of their cohorts, they know, and I want to be as kind as possible here.
Well, you don't have to be. You can be as rough as you want here.
I try to be as kind and I try to be as fair as possible.
Yeah, I know.
But these men realize that they have an audience that is as gullible as can possibly be.
Mm-hmm.
Because Mr. Shorey made the prediction in late 2013 that the Great Tribulation would be in 2014.
Well, they're just bad at math. That's all there is to that, Don.
They're bad at Bible knowledge.
Or lack thereof. Now, for our listeners who may be saying, Jim Bakker, why do I know that name? Well, Jim Bakker is really James Orson Bakker. He is an American televangelist, a former Assemblies of God minister, and a former host with his then-wife, Tammy Faye Bakker, who looked like a hooker on speed most of the time. Did a lousy job on her makeup. She would have been a great embalmer, I think. The PTL Club, a popular evangelical Christian television program. Now, a sex scandal, geez, imagine that, church and sex, makes no sense to me, but anyway, led to his resignation from the ministry. Subsequent revelations, speaking about revelations, of accounting fraud brought about his imprisonment and divorce. He later remarried and returned to televangelism. How can he get away with what he's getting away with? Like, why would anybody even listen to this guy who's 76 years of age? He's a convicted felon. You know, he does everything that the Bible says you shouldn't do. And
exactly.
Yet, how does he sucker people into doing this?
I've already given the answer to that. He knows he's got an audience that is absolutely as gullible. It's kind of like the proverbial weed in the wind, it seems to me, Rob. Whatever direction that Jim Bakker or John Hagee or
right.
whoever decides to blow, that's the direction their audience will go with them without ever asking any questions, without investigating. Look, I've done about 3 YouTube videos now on Mr. Shorey and Jim Bakker.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been exposing how utterly false his statements are, and we'll get more into depth into all the different statements that he made on this program here momentarily, but I've been exposing how utterly false they are, how unbiblical his claims are, and guess what has happened?
What?
Some of his followers, some of Jim Bakker's followers,
Mm-hmm.
have attacked me because, after all, this man is right. He's a prophet of God. How dare I question him? And I'm just going, wait a minute. What is wrong with you people? Did you not hear him say himself on the Jim Bakker show? Well, it's certainly true that the predictions we made concerning last year did not come to pass. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Shorey. You just gave the farm away. You just admitted you're not a prophet of God because, as I corresponded with some people on YouTube who had posted on my blog there, attacking me for questioning the prophetic standing of Mr. Shorey,
Mm-hmm.
I said, here's the deal. And as my YouTube video this morning, and you can find Don K. Preston Morning Musings on YouTube, and just look it up there. But here's the deal.
What's the deal?
The Bible gives us the criteria for determining whether or not a man is a prophet. And it's real clear. It's real emphatic. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, God spoke to Moses. Now, we got to keep in mind that here's Moses, who's called a prophet of God. And when they were in Egypt, what did Moses do? Well, he went in front of Pharaoh, and he said, tell you what, Pharaoh, if you don't let my people go, then tomorrow at this time, there's going to be a plague. He didn't say there might be, could be. I've done a few calculations, and I've kind of been looking at the weather, or et cetera, et cetera. No. He said, if you don't do what I tell you to do, here's what's going to happen tomorrow. Pharaoh wouldn't listen, and on the following day, the plague would hit. So that's who God's talking to in Deuteronomy chapter 18.
Yeah. Well, in all fairness, how do we really know that what happened in the Bible really did happen, that these aren't just mythological stories? Like, how do we know that there was really a plague like it says? No, I'm playing the devil's. I'm playing the devil's advocate here.
That's a great subject for another program. but interestingly enough, there have been some very, very, very fascinating archaeological discoveries over the last few years. Now, they haven't found a cuneiform or hieroglyphic tablet that says Musa went in before Pharaoh Ramses and did the following. No, they haven't done that.
Right.
But what they have found, and this is so fascinating, is ancient rulers, ancient kings, pharaohs, etc. When they wrote history, they wrote what's known as panegyric history. It's kind of a fancy term, but what that means in shorthand is when they wrote their history, when their historians told the story of this given pharaoh or whatever, they always put the best spin possible on things.
Nothing has changed over the years.
Nothing has changed. So in writing these panegyric histories, they have discovered some histories concerning one of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, which would fall well within the wheelhouse of the time of Moses. And the history that was written there is not as flowery. It's not as positive. In other words, you could tell they're really trying ultra hard to put a good spin on something huge, something major that had happened. And so there are some pretty significant archaeological scholars who have now postulated, and some even call it conjecture, but a whole lot of archaeological and historical research is, after all, conjecture until additional information is brought forth. But they're conjecturing and postulating that, hey, you know what? Based upon this panegyric history, it's very possible that something catastrophic actually happened, and that something catastrophic may actually have been the story of Moses and the plagues.
But it may not have been the story of Moses and the plagues either.
We don't know. That's the simple
right.
thing. But the timing is right. The history is not what you would expect for to explain what happened during that period of time. They don't know of anything else in the history of Egypt at that time that would be sufficiently catastrophic to explain the efforts of the historian to go out of their way to write what they did. So it's fascinating. I mean, that's really all about all that we can say about it at this particular time. But anyway, back to the point I wanted to make.
Let's get back to Jim Baker.
Yeah. God told Moses, okay, I'm going to raise up another prophet that is like you, and it shall come to pass that he shall speak in my name. And he said, now I'm giving a real good Oklahoma paraphrase of what he told Moses. Okay. He said, Moses, if a man rises up and he claims to be a prophet, my prophet, and he predicts something is going to come to pass, if it does not come to pass, I did not send him. He is a false prophet. I mean, that's as simple a test as you can get. And by the way, this is absolutely fascinating. And we do have some incredible archaeological confirmation of this, not only the challenge, but of the validity of the historical circumstance. In Isaiah 41:21 and following, and we have to get the what the German scholar called the Zeitzenleben, the life situation, the world context of what's going on here in Isaiah. Here is Israel living in the midst of all these pagan nations, and they've all got their prophets and prophetesses. They've got the entire Baal pantheon, and that includes Chemosh and Ashtaroth and just a host of gods and goddesses, okay? Mm-hmm. Well, they all had their prophets. They all claimed to be able to predict the future. Well, God issued a challenge. Here is Yahweh, the God of Israel, issuing a challenge to all the other gods, and he says, bring forth your strong reasons. Tell us what shall be. Tell us what shall come to pass, that we may know that you are God. So God, Isaiah is the one that issued the challenge, and he said, here is the challenge. Be able to make a legitimate prophecy. Okay, here's the challenge.
All right.
If you can't tell the future in a remarkable way that is beyond the ability of human wisdom and human knowledge, beyond, let's say, political knowledge, beyond, let's say, military knowledge, etc., if you can't tell the future in that way, then guess what? You're not a prophet. Let me illustrate that real quick. John, excuse me, Rob, for years I used to collect the National Enquirer. Not because I liked it, but because I kept track of all these psychics and I kept track of all these so-called prophets. And one year, I counted 82 predictions that were listed in one issue of the Enquirer. Mm-hmm. Okay, the very next year, they come up with another list. Mm-hmm. The list is almost identical, and here's the nature of some of the prophecies. The price of bread will go up dramatically next year. And I'm going, well, duh. I mean, do you have to be a psychic to know this?
No, but you have to understand that newspaper that you referenced was a tabloid, and anyone reading it knew that, because if you read the editorial statement on the inside, it basically said what we have here is a bunch of bunk.
Exactly. Okay, so comparing that, here's Isaiah issuing a challenge to the gods and the goddesses, the prophetess of all the pagan gods. Well, guess what? In Isaiah 4 and 45, now the historical context of Isaiah 44 and 45 is that it was written approximately 170 years, some say up to 175 years, before the arrival of Cyrus, the king of Persia. And yet, Isaiah 44 and 45, here is Isaiah predicting by name, the coming of a man, king of Persia, who would be Yahweh's servant. He wouldn't think he was, but Yahweh would use him in his sovereign decrees and sovereign purposes. And he, the king of Persia, would free the nation of Israel from bondage. Well, guess what?
What?
The book of Ezra, the book of Nehemiah chronicle that very thing. But that prophecy was made before Cyrus was ever even born. It was written before the Persian Empire ever rose to any kind of serious power. It was written almost 200 years before those events came to pass. That's pretty remarkable. Now, we know the dating of Isaiah.
Don, stand by. I've got to take my news break at the bottom of the hour. X-Zone Nation, Don K. Preston is our special guest. www.bibleprophecies.com. And we'll be back on the other side of this news break as we continue here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Once again, www.bibleprophecies.com. I am Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. Don't go away.
While science pursues fact, magic accesses a quantum level, bridging random facts to form truth. As long as science and magic remain separate and polarized, the truth cannot be known. I'm Wilda Wieka. Join me on the Science of Magic radio program dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. During each episode, I'll be speaking with experienced and respected scientists and mystics. From astrologers to astronomers, from medical doctors to shaman, the scientific method to dowsing and intuition, we will weave together information from seemingly divergent practices to promote unity and enlightenment. Join me, Wilda Wieka, and the Science of Magic right here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. For more information, visit www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Thomas Jefferson was a Burgess of 27 when he met Martha Wales Skelton, a 22-year-old widowed heiress who was fondly called Patty by her family. They were married on January the 1st, 1772, and they took up residence in a cabin on the building site on top of a Virginia mountain that Thomas had named Monticello. As Thomas and Patty slowly built their first version of the great house at Monticello, the Revolutionary War was heating up. Patty, with difficulty, bore 5 children, but only 2 girls survived. Thomas's political career developed to the point where he was often away from home. But after he authored and signed the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, he resolved never again to leave his wife. He was elected the governor of Virginia, just as that state became the Revolution's last battleground. The Revolutionary War ended in 1781, and Thomas gladly retired altogether to my family, my farm, and my books. But Patty continued to want to bear her treasured husband a son, and late in the summer of 1782, she died of kidney failure at the age of 33, 4 months after having borne yet another girl. Thomas was so devastated by her death that he never remarried. He mourned her for the rest of his life, even as he helped to frame the peace in France and then became the first Secretary of State, the second Vice President, and the third President of the United States. This story is true. Thomas Jefferson was such an obsessive letter writer and record keeper that we know where he was and what he was doing nearly every day of his adult life. Every significant thing he says in My Thomas comes from his contemporary writings. My Thomas by Roberta Grimes is now available at Barnes & Noble, Costco, Target, Books A Million, Hudson Booksellers, Kmart, Walmart, Sam's Club, Walgreens, CVS, and online at Amazon.com. You can visit Roberta Grimes online at www.robertagrimes.com. Starr began to demonstrate a metaphysical connection to the spirit world as a little girl. Her family noticed the connection, but it was a great-grandmother who told the family that Linnea was indeed gifted. The great-grandmother, who was also gifted, felt that Linnea had indeed inherited these attributes. It has been noticed that oftentimes such things are passed down through the generations. Linnea was also born with a caul, a thin white membrane across a newborn's face. Legend has it that if the baby is born with this caul, the child will have second sight, or what we call psychic abilities. Linnea Starr does past, present, and future, and has the gift of prophecy. It is written within scriptures that if you are able to give factual information and prophecies indeed come true, the gift indeed comes from the divine realm. Linnea Starr does large interactive groups as well as private gatherings. For more information on Linnea Starr or to contact Linnea for a one-on-one consultation, visit her website at www.linneastar.com. That's www.linneastar.com.
You're listening to the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Radio's authority on the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology, celebrating 25 years of broadcasting. Broadcasting around the world and to the great beyond.
And welcome back, everyone. Dr. Don K. Preston is our very special guest this first hour of tonight's show. His website is www.bibleprophecies.com. Don, let me ask you a question. You know there are people out there who claim to have psychic abilities. God, we've had a number of them here on this show over the years, and they make predictions. 95% of their predictions never happen, and society today looks at them and says, yes, so what? And yet they're making tons of money because it seems that they're fulfilling a need of the needy. Anybody who has to go to a psychic to say, well, what should I do now? They're pretty weak people. I believe that they are the praying lamprey of society, that they actually feed off people, and if I had my way, they'd all end up in jail. But the law doesn't see it that way. So, how do you feel as a man of the cloth when you see these people taking advantage of other people?
Quite honestly, Rob, and that's a great question. I'm outraged, just like you. I will give you a great example of the very thing that you're talking about. Some years ago, I helped produce a weekly television program. It was called Christian Magazine. Mm-hmm. We went into the community. We did interviews with people that had interesting jobs. They had interesting experiences, sad experiences, great ones. We interviewed a woman from Seminole, Oklahoma, whose daughter had been murdered in Dallas, Texas. A robber broke into her apartment during the night, raped her, savagely murdered her.
Oh, no.
Needless to say, the mother was just totally devastated. The police seemed to be absolutely at wit's end. They arrested no one over a period of a couple of years. Mm-hmm. The case seemed to be absolutely dead. This woman, in desperation, went to a, quote, famous psychic, unquote, who assured her that she could find, that she knew how to identify the murderer mm-hmm. of her daughter and give her some closure by bringing that man to justice. And over a period of a year, this so-called psychic bilked this woman of almost $100,000.
Good Lord.
Every session was, I know, I just know. I'm getting this message. In our next session, you've got to come back, and the spirits will reveal something amazing, something powerful, something convincing. Well, the next session was that way, almost $100,000, until this woman finally woke up and realized that she was being played the fool. She was no nearer the arrest of the murderer of her beloved daughter, and she actually filed suit against this psychic and won, by the way, revealed this psychic. And I have seen that over and over again, not on that major of a scale, thankfully, but I have seen that type of thing take place. And I have to tell you, I had a very good friend. He passed away a year and a half ago now. His name was John Anderson. And at one time, he was the appointed psychic to, what was the man's name of Hustler magazine? Name just skipped me at the moment. But he predicted an attempted assassination. Well, it came to pass. But John Anderson came out of that occultic world. He came out of that psychic world. And he wrote a couple of books on it. And John and I were very, very close and dear friends. And he told me about the inner workings of the psychic world. And he told me, I knew some of the top psychics in the world. And he said, I was considered at one time one of the best psychics in Hollywood. And he said, it's nothing but a sham. He said, you get to where you can read people. You can read their personalities. You learn where people are gullible. You learn where people are susceptible. And guess what? That's what's happening with Jim Bakker and John Shorey and John Hagee and all of these others false religious prophets. They know that people have an innate desire to know what's going to happen. Look, I tell you what, Rob, I would have loved to have known what the Powerball numbers were going to be.
You and me both, friend.
And isn't it amazing, Rob,
yes,
that none of these psychics ever win the lottery?
Well, they can explain that very easily because they they cannot use their gift for their own purposes. And my answer to them is, well, if it's a gift, why do you charge people?
Absolutely. And furthermore, why not reveal to your best friend? Let that Powerball lottery winning benefit them, and without any expectation of being rewarded. Hey, if it turns out that your buddy wants to benefit you, sure, that's fine. But you're not doing it for the reward. And by the way, where's the book written that said you couldn't use the psychic ability for your own personal benefit? Is there a book about that somewhere? I don't remember that.
Yeah.
So that's where these people come in, and that's where they benefit. Like the story that I just related about this dear lady and her murdered daughter. Needless to say, she was vulnerable. Needless to say, she was desperate. And it's a slightly different slant on it, Rob, but my own mother had terminal cancer. And the doctors told her she had 3 to 6 months to live. She called me up one day. Of course, she had gone to the different medical doctors seeking a different diagnosis. Somebody please help me. Somebody please help me. And she called me up and she said, Don, what do you think about me going to Mexico? I've heard about some people down there that can cure cancer.
Right.
And I did some investigation of the clinic, and it was nothing but a scam. And I told my mother, I said, look, I understand your desperation, but this is nothing but a money-taking scam. It's not going to help you. Well, thankfully, she didn't go down there, and she didn't spend a lot of money and what have you. But when we as human beings are going through a traumatic period, when we see the world in a mess, okay, we want to look for answers.
Sure.
And if somebody jumps up and says, just like Mr. Shorey did on the Jim Bakker show, he said, I have a prophetic word from God. Wow. Woohoo. I mean, let's face it. If God is talking directly to a man, who am I to argue with him? Well, I can argue with him because his track record is rotten. Mm-hmm. His track record said in 2013 he predicted the Great Tribulation in March of 2014. Okay, scratch one up to failure. Now he's predicted the Great Tribulation in March of 2016. I guess he took vacation in 2015. I don't really know.
He must have.
But the point of fact is, now, guess what? He's only got a month for the Great Tribulation to break out. And by the way, Rob, one woman trying to defend him wrote on my blog on YouTube, you don't understand. World War III has already begun. And I responded and I said, really? Are you even familiar what a world war is? Go back and look at what World War I was like. Go back and look at what World War II was like and point out to me where that type of thing is happening in the world anywhere today. Well, she never responded. But that's the desperation of people. when we see the world and we see turmoil and strife, we want somebody to give us some kind of reassurance. And that's natural human nature to a certain extent. But, you know, in the first century, Rob, in the days in which I believe wholeheartedly that God was inspiring men to be prophets, that he guided them infallibly. We have, for instance, a man by the name of Agabus in Acts chapter 11. He stood up a good while before it happened, and he said there was going to be a famine in the land of Judea. Guess what? A couple of years later, there was a famine. Now, I suppose a person could extrapolate and postulate and say, well, you know, famine is kind of a cyclical type of thing. Famine happens here, there, and everywhere. Well, okay, but things were going really, really well in Judea at that particular time, we know historically. So for him to stand up and say, there's about to be a famine, hey, that's going against the current grain of things. And so, again, I am firmly convinced that God did inspire prophets in the first century, but he also warned people back then, to beware of false prophets. The Apostle John said, there are many false prophets who are going out in the world. Test the prophets to see whether they are of God. How do you test a prophet? Well, just like God told Moses, if his prophecies fail, he's not a prophet. And so when you have good grief, how many false prophecies has Hal Lindsey made? How many false prophecies has Tim LaHaye made? How many false prophecies have John Hagee and now John Shorey? And I could, you know...
Yeah, I know you can, but let me ask you this, okay? What makes them any worse than any other person who preaches from the Bible?
Oh, my. As I commented on the YouTube video that I made this morning.
Well, let's get to the question here. Come on, because there are so many different religions in the world.
Yes, you know, there's a difference, Rob, between interpretation of Scripture and standing up and saying, "God spoke to me. I am a prophet." As I said on my YouTube this morning, you know what? All of us are human beings. If we don't understand the cultural, geopolitical, social, economic, military context and the worldview of the Scriptures that we are reading, after all, they're 2,000 years old, and it was written by Hebrews to Hebrews about Hebraic promises. We today were raised in, indoctrinated in, Alexandrian Grecian worldview, and those are two diametrically opposing worldviews. So if I approach the Scriptures and I try to interpret the Scripture in the same way that I would pick up a newspaper and use the same terms in the same way, define the terms in the same way, I'll guarantee you I'm going to misinterpret the Scriptures. But again, that's far different from standing up and saying, like I went to a public debate one time, Rob, and a man said, I was in my shower, and in a voice just as audible as I'm speaking right now, the voice of God spoke to me and told me such and such. And I'm sitting in the audience going, no, you're a liar.
But how do you know? All the different, wait a sec, Don, because throughout history, saints who are revered by millions claim that they have heard the voice of God. How do we know that they did not hear anything, but they believed they did? So how does this make this great saints any different from Mr. John Q. Public, who is in his shower, who believes that he too has heard the voice of God, or that he has seen Jesus, or that he walks with Jesus, or that the archangels have come to them? How do we know that they're not right? And what gives us the authority to challenge that?
Absolutely wonderful question, Rob. And it's the point that comes right down to the issue. Paul wrote to the church at Corinth, and there were some men there who were claiming to be apostles. They were claiming to be prophets. And Paul said, Okay, here's the deal, guys, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously.
Yeah.
But he said, if any man claims to be a prophet, let him acknowledge that the things that I've written to you, these are the commandments of God. In other words, Paul didn't even appeal to himself as the final authority. He said the word that he had written, which he said was from the Holy Spirit, was the final definitive authority. So when we come to the 2nd century and we find a guy by the name of Ignatius, by the way, from approximately 105 to 112 or 117 AD, he wrote a series of letters to the different churches. He had been captured by the Romans. He's on his way to Rome to be persecuted, to be martyred.
Don, stand by. Stand by. I've got to take my final break here. Exonation.
Sure.
Dr. Don K. Preston is our guest. www.bibleprophecies.com. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We'll be back on the other side of this short break. Don't go away. Are you considering calling a psychic to read your situation? Then consider David Champion, a psychic medium for more than 20 years with thousands of readings under his belt. David Champion will make you feel comfortable. He has proven to be honest and accurate. He's a straight shooter. There's no guesswork. What he sees is what you get. While he is a medium, most of the calls focus on relationships, not only love, but work, school, neighbors, and more. Need help with finding a job and preparing for the interview? Are you dealing with people who are obstacles in your path? For more information, go to davidchampion.com, $1.50 per minute paid by credit card with a minimum of 30 minutes. For your reading with David Champion, call 1-877-702-8598. That's 1-877-702-8598. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464. The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howe will expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com. Dr. Don K. Preston is our special guest, www.bibleprophecies.com. But you know, Don, how do we know that people who say they hear God or hear Jesus or see angels really aren't? You know, like, who are we to judge?
Well, if we accept the Bible as any kind of definitive final authority, which I most assuredly do, It comes down to what the Bible says over what people say. And the Bible even warns us against believing people who put their confidence in things that they have personally experienced instead of the Word of God. And let's put this down on the most basic level, because we're talking about Jim Bakker and John Shorey in regard to the time of the end. Okay, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 16, 27, 28, and he was speaking, he was standing in front of an audience of living, breathing human beings, and he said, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in power and great glory. Now, our Western, Grecianized, literalistic worldview says, that means Jesus is going to come back out of heaven on a literal cloud as a 5'5" Jewish man. That's not the Hebraic view of the coming of the Lord, but I don't have time to develop that. But here's the point. Jesus said before all that audience died, he was coming back. Okay. He either lied, he failed, or he kept his word. Well, again, in one of my books, Like Father, Like Son on Clouds of Glory, and it's available on that website, Bible Prophecy. It's prophecy singular, by the way, BibleProphecy.com. You'll find an in-depth study of the nature of Christ's coming, showing he wasn't predicting he was coming back as a 5'5" Jewish man at all. Okay, so here's the dilemma. He said he was coming back before all those people died. So he lied, he failed, or he came. And if he kept his word, then John Shorey is a false teacher, Jim Bakker is a false teacher, John Hagee is a false teacher, Hal Lindsey is a false teacher, and anyone else who says the coming of the Lord is in the future is a false teacher, unless we've got some folks that are 2,000 years old walking around in our world today. Now, if we understand that the coming of the Lord in the Bible is when God, through his sovereignty, used one nation to destroy and judge another nation, and he was never seen visibly, he was never seen physically and bodily, but when he used this nation to judge that other nation, he was described as coming out of heaven on a cloud and in flaming fire with a trumpet. But the language is metaphoric. It's hyperbolic, exaggerated, figurative language. And guess what? In AD 70, Jesus came in judgment of the Old Covenant world of Israel in the destruction of Jerusalem, just as he said he would. So, John Shorey's 2,000 years too late. When we understand, and it's all about context, isn't it, Rob? Any book that we read is all about context. The great problem of 99.9% of Bible students today do not approach the Bible with the proper perspective, with the proper context. But they say things like, it says what it means what it says. But it does in the proper context.
Well, doesn't it also depend on the person's interpretation of what they read? Because let's face it, going back to the biblical times, there wasn't 5% knowledge of the knowledge that we have today. So 95% of the puzzle was missing. But now with all the pieces of the puzzle, can we really look back and say, yep, that really happened?
Well, actually, here's something fascinating. And this gets back to what I'm talking about, context. The average Jew, especially the Jewish boy, by the time he was 13, this blows my mind, Rob.
Don, I hate to do this, but we're running out of time.
Oh, I know. But the average boy could quote the first
five
books.
Don, I hate to do this, but I've got to go. Exonation, I'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. We're going to be joining our CNN affiliates to keep up with the news on this caucus day in Iowa. I am Rob McConnell. We'll be back at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour. Don't go away.